This video is going to show you a glazing technique for pottery that I call the wipe technique. And in short, this is done by applying glaze into the cracks and crevices of a ceramic piece to enhance the texture. So here you can see on this piece of red clay, this mask, I have applied black glaze in all of the cracks and then a clear coat over the top. This mask shows the exact same technique with the black glaze to enhance all of the cracks and crevices, only this one does not have a clear coat of glaze over the top. So there you can see the same technique with different results. On this white clay coil vase, I've done the exact same technique except for I've applied colorful glaze in all of the cracks and crevices. To demonstrate this technique, I'm going to be using a mug that I created using red clay and black glaze. I don't need to use any special utensils, I'm just using a regular brush, and the only difference here is instead of painting the glaze on, I'm applying it fairly liberally or thick, and I'm dabbing the glaze in. I want to dab rather than brush because I want to make sure that this glaze goes in all of the little cracks and crevices. And I'm going to take some time to do this all around my mug. So now you can see I have an even coating of black glaze on my entire piece. There are some spots that are empty, and those are just spots where I don't see any texture. So now the second step to this process, I have a container of water and a round sponge. I'm going to get that sponge wet, but then I'm going to wring the water out. We don't want it soaking wet, we just want it damp. And I'm going to take and rub this sponge over the surface, and I'm wiping the glaze off of the raised areas. Now I'm going to have to take some time to do this, wringing out my sponge in between, but I'm taking care to wipe the glaze off of the areas that are raised so that the glaze stays in the cracks and crevices. Overall, this will help to enhance my texture and design. Now, one tip that I have for you is to use an older sponge. So especially if you have a lot of texture like I do in the beard and on the hair of my mug, it tends to kind of rip and chew up the sponges, and sometimes you're not able to use them afterwards. So if you do have an older sponge that's on its last leg, and if you have a mug with a lot of texture or a piece with a lot of texture like I do, I would suggest using that. If your piece does not have a lot of rough texture, you can use any sponge. But as you can see there, I'm getting my sponge wet, I'm wringing it out, and I'm wiping, repeating as I rotate through the entire mug. Now here you can see I have most of the areas wiped, but I do have a few smaller spaces that I would like to get in. So my tip there, I've placed my sponge down and I'm taking something like the back of a paintbrush. I could also use a pencil, something smaller, a clay tool, in order to push that sponge into that smaller area. I'm not able to do that by hand, so I need to use an additional tool to get into those smaller spaces. So there you have it. You can see I have all of my raised areas wiped clean, and the black glaze remains in all of the cracks. I did this all the way around, but I did leave the inside of the mug empty to take on a different color of glaze. And here you can see my mug with my final touches of glaze. And here you can see my final mug once it has been glazed with some different colors and fired a second time. You can see the black glaze that I dabbed into the cracks and crevices has remained, and it enhances and highlights my texture.